to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast with Borg, Betz, and a baller.
Welcome back. It's October 30th here on the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. I'm Kyle Borganoni, and I'm joined by two fine gentlemen, Matthew Betz and Mike Wright.
Well, thank you, Kyle. You're okay as well, I guess. Happy Halloween, boys.
Happy Halloween.
I'm feeling pretty good about Halloween this year.
Are you? Did you get in the spirit?
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those holidays that gets better as your kids get older, because I don't have to go around as much, kind of get to hang out. I got a good thing going on my street, so yeah, it's not what it was. Like Betz, where Betz is right now is you are basically having to do everything for your kids.
Correct. Yes, I will be pulling the wagon on Thursday night with the twins in there, and then I think the plan is we'll each take like a street or two in our neighborhood and then switch because we've got the baby at home as well. So we'll have the newborn to get down right around the same time the twins come in full of sugar and create chaos right at bedtime. So it's going to be great. I can't wait. And then we get to watch Aaron Rodgers, yell at his teammates for 3 hours right after that. So it should be great on Thursday night.
Do you have the people that have the bag for the kiddos, but then they have the cooler for
a couple
the
of our
grown-ups?
houses do have that, yes. And our neighbors specifically have that.
Shout out to all the people who are doing that. You're doing some good work.
Yeah, we have a good setup in our cul-de-sac where we have an entire potluck and as many drinks and everything else set up in our cul-de-sac where we just get to hang out. But shout out to Nate, and we're bringing together neighborhoods on the podcast. These people they're definitely tuning into Dynasty football in late October.
Oh, for sure. Shout out to my neighbor Rebecca. She's great. I know she's listening.
I do have a good memory of when I was trick-or-treating a couple of years ago in Arizona. I was with Jason at the time, and there happened to be a game on that night as well. And it was when we were in the throngs of Evan McPherson's over.
Oh, that was a time.
We're just...
Yeah, that was an infamous one.
There was a time where we did it every single week too.
Evan McPherson giveth and Evan McPherson taketh. There was a bountiful wager there on McPherson hitting what was over 1.5 field goals or something. Yeah, not that week. That one.
Let's just say Jason wasn't paying attention too much to trick-or-treating. He was just having a good old time.
Me and him were doing the same exact watching. And just that one sucked.
Yeah, that was a good one. So on this episode, we will do a weekly rewind, talk about some wide receivers. I feel like we're at the point now where I had priors on certain guys a month into the season, and then I get to week 6, 7, 8. I'm like, oh, I have to kind of change the way I think about certain players, certain pass catching groups of I thought this was the pecking order. This looks different now. So we'll talk about some of those. And then today we will do a Dynasty keep, trade, cut. And I think, in Dynasty, obviously you're not cutting a lot of these guys, but you are assessing value and you're assessing value moving forward. And I think one of the hardest things in Dynasty is looking at certain players and saying, I think this player is more valuable rest of season than maybe he is in Dynasty because I'm projecting what he's going to be a year or two ahead of time. We're at the point in the season where people are trying to figure out if they're pretenders or not. So let's check in real quick. Mike, in the main Ballers Dynasty League, you got your butt kicked this week by Jeremy and I, but you're still the best team in the league.
I lost by 6 due to my playing Jordan Mason, who got hurt instead of George Pickens, who I just traded for. Would have won, but that's right. I'm still I think it's between me and one other team. We would be considered the favorites.
Yeah, Mike's got a good squad. He won last year. And then, but Jeremy and I are definitely up-and-coming team. We just got Puka back.
Sure.
Big win over Mike. So the momentum, and that's everything. In real football, we know that that's everything, real momentum, but especially in fantasy football. Betz, in the Dino Junior League, you are also a reigning champ.
Yeah, kind of.
Well,
Yeah, I was very fortunate to take over this team. I feel like
he's a reigning champ the way like Carson Wentz
correct.
was a reigning champ.
Correct.
Carson Wentz.
Also huge Doug Peterson revenge game this weekend in Philly, boys. Yeah, so I took over this team that, normally when you take over an orphan, you're like, all right, like, this is going to be a 3-year rebuild, 4 years. Like, you're left with picks and maybe like a good player or two. I got a team with Jalen Hurts, Debo, George Kittle. Kyron was on this team. I was like, okay, we can make this work. So it's been good. It's been good so far. I will say the team is very top heavy. So like any injury to one of these key pieces, and it feels like it could go south very, very quick. But right now, it's looking good.
Yeah, you are firmly entrenched in second place.
I saw that. Who's in first?
Behind Jason and I's champ squad that I don't know how we keep winning. I don't. Some teams are just they got the touch, and this one does. It just finds the right matchups. We started on the wrong guys this week, and we still won.
Yeah, I've always hated your team, and I called for your demise.
Because it looks
3
bad.
years ago, I called for your demise, but it has not happened yet.
Yeah.
I did want to give a shout out to our Discord channel. If you are a member, a Foot Clan member, our Dynasty Discord channel is hopping on Wednesday. We're actually doing a Dynasty roster review. So if you're one of those people, you're like, I want to walk through my roster with somebody else, with people. We have that on Wednesday. We've done it in the past, but it's backed by popular demand. So there's lots of different people in there that would review your roster if you want to do that. So ballersdiscord.com if you want to be a part of that. Let's move on.
Weekly Rewind.
All right, every single week we rewind the film and we get to talk about a different player, different guys that we're just thinking about deeper and thinking about, hey, what actually is the difference between their box score and what we see on film? And I'll let Betz go first because this is a player I think all three of us are excited about. We're excited about in redraft, but the dynasty implications is something we haven't talked about. And if you would have told me that this player after the end of 2023 would be a relevant player, it would have shocked me because his yards per route run metrics were doo-doo. I mean, just like nobody returns from this. It was 0.64. So I will let you, Betz, reveal this player before I keep talking and string this along as long as I possibly can.
Yeah, I thought this player was just done after the rookie year because, we often point out like there's thresholds you look at. We talked about that last week.
Never say his name.
I won't
ever say his name.
People just have to guess. There's thresholds you look at, and this player, who will not be named, I'm just kidding, I'll tell you in a sec, was just so far off the radar of like, this is not going to work, and you move on and you kind of just reset with another rookie pick. But Cedric Tillman, coming out of Tennessee, we have to remember that conversation was, well, Jalen Hyatt is, I think in the fantasy community, people were more excited about Jalen Hyatt, and Tillman was kind of viewed as like the other Tennessee wide receiver in that class. Hyatt won the Blitnikoff Award in 2022, so like he was kind of in the shadows, but Tillman dealt with injury during his final season in college. But before that, the dude put up this first 1,000-yard season for a wide receiver since Justin Hunter. He did that in 2021. So like the production was there. He just kind of flew under the radar, 74th overall pick. But like you said, the rookie season, it was just lost. Now with the Amari Cooper trade, all of a sudden, Cedric Tillman is an every down player for this team, and he's earning targets at a very high level, over 20%, which is a pretty good mark for any player, but one that especially that is inexperienced like Tillman. So I went back and watched this past week's game and then as well the one prior. And, I wasn't like overly impressed with him as a player. I think he's done pretty well, obviously, but just on tape, like he looks like a good to above average wide receiver, nothing crazy. Like watching him play, I'm watching, guys like Malik Neighbors move or Marvin Harrison. It's just totally different. But the way he's being used is what's super encouraging. It's not just down the field stuff. It's sometimes manufactured touches via screens. It's quick hitters on slants. It's all sorts of different routes that, at least in this offense, like I'm excited about Tillman, especially with Jameis. As long as Jameis is there, they're going to push the ball downfield. Good things happen. Even Jerry Jeudy had a good game last week with Jameis Winston. And like Jeudy has just never capitalized on the opportunity year over year over year. Like I think Tillman could emerge and be the guy you want, especially given that he's kind of their traditional X receiver playing outside on 80% of his routes. So I'm excited about Tillman, not just rest of season, but maybe as a dynasty gem who could have value moving into the 2025 season as well.
I loved Cedric Tillman going into the draft process, and looking back, just what it was like, he was a 3rd-round pick, right? Yeah. And then I was going to make a comment about how he got drafted before Jalen Hyatt, but he didn't. In fact, Jalen Hyatt was 1 pick in front. Like, do you guys? I do not remember that at all. It went Jalen Hyatt to the Giants, Cedric Tillman to the Cleveland Browns, right back to back. But I was excited about Cedric Tillman, the prospect. He got the day 2 draft capital, like a round 3 pick. We can make that work. And then it was such a disaster. We gave all the numbers, but on the main show, we were talking about, because Elijah Moore also had a good game, and we were talking about, is Elijah Moore good? Is he not good? Because you felt like you could answer that question pretty confidently, heading into this year. Like, Elijah Moore is probably he's not the guy who we thought he could become when he had that like the half a year for the Jets. But then you look at the situation that he found himself in of 2 years with the terrible Jets and the Zach Wilson experience, then Watson last year, and it's like no one's succeeding. Like no one is succeeding in these situations. Not even Garrett Wilson was succeeding at a level that was justified by his draft capital. And now you're 1.5 games in to post Watson, and you're like, oh, hey, there's Elijah Moore, there's Jerry Jeudy. So it's just I'm bringing it up as in, I think having these historical markers, it's extremely useful, because it really is a good guide. Like, hey, what yards per route run, what targets per route run did you hit as a rookie? And now we can compare you to these other players. I think we got to factor in situation just a little bit more into the put some more context in those numbers, because no one is succeeding with this team with Deshaun Watson at the quarterback position. So I'm with you, Betz. I am pretty excited, and Jameis will be there for the rest of the year. Unlike which we don't know the answer for, the quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts, Anthony Richardson, who was benched for Joe Flacco, that at least for a week, and we don't know how long that's going to be. We've got to at least mention that on the Dynasty show, because people are going to want to hear about Richardson's Dynasty value. So before we exit or move on to the next segment, Kyle, let's make sure we have a Richardson discussion.
Okay, we can definitely do that. And last thing I'll add about Tillman, Betz, you put on the nose, it's like, before it was just like, are you going to get a deep bomb? That was his only thing. And he was getting snaps at the end of last year, but they were just meaningless. He was just running cardio. You're seeing the intermediate routes. And the only player I brought up as like who's similar body type and who's didn't do anything the first year was Nico Collins, a big body receiver who started getting involved in the intermediate area. And I only bring that up as just like, here's an X receiver, and if you find the right combination, we did find that last year with Stroud, then you could see something. So I think if you had Tillman, he was just sitting on the end of a bench, you weren't hoping for anything. Maybe people picked him up.
He was on a waiver wire. He started getting he got that camp buzz. Like, he got the steady drum beat over it, and then, I mean, all hopes for Cleveland went into the garbage after the first couple of weeks. You're like, that's the same old bullcrap. But now we have renewed hope.
All right, I wanted to bring up the Buffalo pass catchers, because I watched through Amari Cooper, Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid. Just was like, how is this team, like, how are their targets being dished out? Because first off, I thought that Buffalo just completely blew them out. That game was super close at halftime. In fact, I think Seattle should have come away at halftime being the team in the lead. Like, they had the ball inside the 5. There's a couple of times where Josh Allen fumbled it and kicked it forward, and Ty Johnson picked it up. Like, it was a weird game. But my biggest takeaway is that Keon Coleman is being used in creative ways. Like, there was twice where he was used to the big slot. That was the thing where, like, please, like, don't let him just run outside stuff. Like, give him creative stuff. He had a lot of press coverage, and he just beat it. And they also gave him some end zone targets where it's like, hey, you're a former basketball player. Why don't you just jump up? And that's where one of his touchdowns was. So I was impressed by Coleman, and you've been impressed the last couple weeks. And then the last thing I'll say is Khalil Shakir, 9 for 107. it's really hard for me to assess players like that because there's so much manufactured screen stuff that he gets extra yards too. It's not like he's Elijah Moore who usually falls down. He actually gets extra yards after the catch. And so a lot of his, yards per reception numbers look really big, which is rare for somebody who gets a ton of screens, but he was targeted on 39% of his routes. So so far it's like Cooper has not really been part of the game plan, or at least he's been game planned out. I mean, Seattle does have some good big name cornerbacks too, but it's just interesting. You came into the season thinking Dalton Kincaid is their one, or at least he could lead the team in targets, or maybe it's Curtis Samuel. Now Curtis Samuel feels like they just threw a bunch of money in the toilet and they don't even care about it. And then they trade for Cooper and they haven't used him. So I don't really know what to think about this. I do like the fact they're passing the ball more. So for fantasy purposes, you can see some outputs. I wouldn't go chasing Shakir as a player like, oh, look at all this volume. I think it's going to swing week to week where you're going to see more Cooper, and Kincaid's still targeted a ton. It just looks like Shakir gets targeted a ton, but it's a bunch of screens. So that's kind of my read on the situation. I think Coleman is trending the right direction, and we are going to talk about him later this episode. So just wanted to throw that out there.
All right, I wanted to talk about Jalen McMillan, rookie wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Bucks. Let's see if we could. Was there anything we can take out of the 1 week sample that we got and say, okay, maybe this is how they're going to be utilizing these wide receivers moving forward? And it was kind of for me, there was the hope that McMillan would move into the slot and play that Chris Godwin role for the Bucks offense. That did not happen. He was, in fact, McMillan was the outside wide receiver 71% of the time, just under 30% of the snaps inside the slot. It started off really slow for McMillan. I'd like his first, official target wasn't until the second quarter. There might have been one callback on penalty. I don't recall. But he ends with 7 targets, 4 for 35. So, production-wise, that's not very good. But he had 30% of the team's air yards. And when you go back and watch, there are 3 just huge misses. As a huge miss, as in 3 touchdowns for Jalen McMillan. Literally, his first target is, I don't know if it was an option route for McMillan and he turned the wrong way, but McMillan's running out and McMillan cuts in. Baker throws outside. If McMillan had turned outside, it's a touchdown. The very next target for McMillan is, just a little bit of a creative route, beats his guy. And he has a step against double coverage. Baker misses him just in the end zone. And then a couple catches. And then there's another play where they put him in the backfield and he wheeled out up the left side.
They picked it off.
And Baker didn't look the safety off long enough. Like the safety bit on the underneath route, but just not. Baker didn't hold him there. And if Baker had held him there, that's a touchdown. So it was pretty wild to see literally his first target could have been a touchdown had they been in sync, but they weren't. So it was more of a, okay, I have some optimism here. I have some optimism that McMillan will be useful for fantasy. I don't know that he can climb up into being like a top 20 guy or anything like that. Cade Otton seems like he's going to be legitimate. They've been making Cade Otton be the cardio king for
My heart is so happy.
Years. And now he's finally getting his due. So that's exciting. But I think that there's hope that McMillan could be a top 30 type of a wide receiver play. Just hit on one of those plays, and now you're at a score and probably 60, 70 yards, which we'll take that every day of the
Betz,
week.
You were always a McMillan guy. I feel like you talked him up a lot during the prospect evaluation portion. Like, do you kind of see things similar as Mike?
Yeah, for sure. I think everybody was excited about him this past week just because of the projected opportunity, and I think the general feeling around him is like disappointment. It's like, it was fine. Nothing super exciting in the stat line like Mike talked about. But, you have to also recall there was a little bit of a stretch in the middle of the season. It feels like the season's so young. We're already entering week 9, but there was like a 2 or 3 game stretch where he was injured and was out of the rotation. Now he's back in, and not just in, but like in as the potential dude, behind Cade Otton, of course. But until Mike Evans gets back as the dude, Sterling Shepard also just picked up a hamstring injury. So regardless, he has to be a feature of the offense in the pass game, along with the running backs and Cade Otton. But yeah, I think you're hopeful to see this continue to grow with him, where my biggest concern was, how does he get typecasted in the NFL? Is it just as a slot wide receiver? Do they view him as perimeter? Can he be a replacement if there's an injury to Evans or someone like that? I think the answer is yes. There was a ton of coach speak around him saying, like, they trust him. They put their resources in as far as the NFL draft to go get him. They have a mindset, at least, to like feature him, I think, in the offense. So I'm pretty encouraged for Jalen McMillan rest of season. I think it's not make or break time for him as far as like dynasty outlook for next year. But if he doesn't do much for the next few weeks without Evans, I think you're going to be largely disappointed. If he flashes, he's going to have a ton of value moving into next year with the Godwin uncertainty and all of that. So I'm excited about Jalen McMillan. I hope he can capitalize over the next 2-3 weeks.
I'll just add too, he just looks smooth. Yeah. Like for the most part, I know it didn't work out stat wise, but like when I watched the film, I was like, I feel like this guy's getting out of his breaks well. He just looks smooth moving down the field. And this team doesn't have a lot of explosive players without Evans and Godwin. So it's like when you're looking around, it's like, is this going to be Sterling Shepard? Like that, like no one else on the team really gives you that kind of boom potential. So I like it.
This is not actionable advice. I just had passing thought about it. The Washington wide receivers not working so far.
Oh, your college wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean you had 3 of them. You had big expectations for at least 2 of them, and Rome, Polk, and McMillan, and no one's doing nothing yet.
So what you're saying is that it was all Penix.
It's not.
It was all Penix.
It's not actionable. It came
just an observation.
One of those thoughts. You're like, oh yeah, all 3 of them no one's doing nothing.
Yeah, the quarterback elevated them in college. That's what I'm going to take away from that.
Maybe.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right, so Mike brought it up earlier, and before we get into keep, trade, cut, I think it is worth taking a little time, just kind of assessing, because we haven't talked about this. We don't have this in our notes or anything like that. Just off the cuff, we got the news about Anthony Richardson and Joe Flacco being the starter this week. I liked kind of reading the tea leaves for the first day where they were like, well, we're going to talk about it. And then they asked our boy JBC, Jim Bob Cooter, and he's like, I'm not supposed to tell anybody. And then all of a sudden they did make the announcement. So what is y'all's first reaction with Anthony Richardson in Dynasty specific? Because going in the season, we would have definitely had him ranked in the top 10, and we would have had him ranked as probably 6, 7, just based on pure upside. And I have teams where I thought, I have an upside play at QB2. I am going to destroy my league. And now I'm at the point where I don't have a second quarterback in that league.
I had Richardson ranked very aggressively because
like 5 or 6?
Yeah. I mean, I had him like a spot ahead of Stroud. That's how aggressive I was trying to be with, and more so of not necessarily a full belief in the player, but just the belief in the numbers of quarterbacks that run, and like him being potentially becoming a difference-making quarterback. Because once you're out of the guys who make a difference, then guess what? It doesn't make a difference on your squads. If we're talking single quarterback, you're like, am I starting Kirk Cousins every week? Am I starting Jared Goff every week? It doesn't matter. It like in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter too much. I have these 2 or 3 quarterbacks. I pick whoever has the best matchup. Because I don't have Lamar, I don't have Jalen Hurts. Like there's just a few guys who can actually, when you stare down them in a matchup, you go, oh no, I really hope this isn't a Josh Allen game. So that's what it was trying to capture, that where like I don't know if Stroud can ever become that. Like I think Stroud's good. I don't know that Stroud can ever become a difference-making fantasy quarterback. The jury's still out on that. But so back to Richardson, I mean, this is very different to me than the Bryce Young benching. Of Bryce Young was the number 1 overall pick. He was supposed to be polished and ready to go in the NFL. Ready. And then you see him out there looking like he is like, if this is the ready version, I mean, obviously you got to acclimate to the pros, but this doesn't look like a guy who's going to be a professional, where I can say that about Richardson, but you knew that as a team going into it. It was, I think the biggest mistake was simply just putting Richardson in right away. Like I have moved, I don't know if I've mentioned on this show or not, I was very much on if you draft a rookie quarterback in the top 10, put him in week 1. Just do it. I'm changing my tune of like the opportunity to sit these guys, at least maybe even just a half a year. Like with what's going on with Drake May. I'm watching Drake May play and going, you know what? Maybe my evaluation wasn't correct on Drake May. I think they may have something. And had you started Drake May in week 1, I bet we're having all of these discussions right now of when are the Patriots going to bench Drake May? This isn't working. Instead of let him be on an NFL roster for a while. Let him get through half of a season at the minimum. So it's now, can you develop Richardson off the starting position? And I think it has to do this. There's too many people in the Colts organization. I mean, if you recall how furious I was on the Main Footballers podcast when they hired Jeff Saturday, because I said that this is an unserious move and there are real human beings with real jobs on the line, and you're seriously going to give Jeff Saturday a head coaching gig? Like that's absurd. It is absolutely absurd. And it's kind of you're in a somewhat similar situation with Richardson of there's too many jobs on the line. You can't just wait and hope that it works for this one guy. You got to figure out a different way to move him forward that isn't at the expense of all these other players and all these other humans. So I think they're doing the right thing. Will he develop into the quarterback? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to happen. And so for like actionable dynasty stuff, his value is definitely now plummeted. So if you're going to trade him, you're trading him way low. But I might be willing to do that in a single quarterback.
In a single, you could probably take. You would be willing to take a second, but in a Superflex league, it's like, would you rather have a late first or Anthony Richardson in a Superflex?
I mean, it's really calling your shots and just weighing out where you think the probabilities are, and I think I would take the pick.
That's fair. I think right now is not the right time to trade him away, though. If you share the same opinion as Mike, which, truthfully, I don't know where I stand because, well, let me back up first. The reason I wouldn't trade him now is because the perceived value is very low. But there will be a time next summer when there is buzz around the Colts offense, and maybe Richardson has fixed it, and there's positive OTA reports, and everybody's in the best shape of their life. It always happens. I'm waiting could be that, if you share that opinion, which I think that's fine if you do. But for Richardson, like for me, it's so tough because I think the preseason expectations are really what it comes down to. Like with Richardson, you saw the flashes in year 1, and you're like, okay, if this hits, it's going to be great. They've got a good coach, a good play caller. They've got a top-tier running back. They've got good pass catchers. They've got a good offensive line. The expectation is that this will work. I don't think anybody even really like entertained that it's going to be terrible. I mean, Andy was pretty much on that, but most people were like, this is going to work.
He was.
Where with like Bryce Young, we saw terrible play on the field. They had the lowest win total in the league. Like everybody was like, this is going to fail. And it did. And now we're like, yep, not surprised by that. So I think just the preseason expectation is kind of what we need to go back to. And so for me, I still think there is a world that exists where this could work down the line. I think right now with where things are at, and like the Colts can win with Joe Flacco. That's the tricky part, is that they can win with Flacco. So
they're one game out of the playoffs.
Yeah, so I think this is the right move for them.
If they beat the Texans in that game last week, they're tied record-wise. They would have been tied record-wise with the Texans, and I assume they would have had the tiebreaker then. So they would have been in first place if they had just won that game. So I think it's
the right move for the team to go try to win right now. Like you've got a good enough roster to compete. But I do think there's a period of time where Richardson's opportunity perceived in the market will come back, and it will be next offseason. So I'm worried about Richardson sticking around the league as a starter. When he is there and he runs, it will be good for fantasy, but that's a completely different conversation. So if you can recoup a late first for Richardson, even a mid first for Richardson next year if there's buzz, I am doing that. But I think right now selling Richardson or trading him away is probably not what I would do, just based off the timing aspect of it.
Right. I love what you said, though. It's all about the timing and what part of the year in the Dynasty calendar, like, are you willing to trade this person? Right now is not the time. And I think there will be. Now, remember, in week 1, he went bonkers and he had some of those rainbow throws that we remember, scored 26 points. He was the QB4 and completed 47% of his passes. It's like, in the moment, we were like, okay, he's not going to complete passes, but who cares? Like, we're going to get this rushing upside. He ran for 56. He hasn't surpassed that mark since. So, I don't know. I think at the end of the day, he's a hold, especially in Superflex, because I think that your best case scenario, I don't think anybody's going to give you a back of the first right now. Like, a team that is getting that pick is good enough to make the playoffs, and they're like, okay, well, I could shoot for the moon for next year, but they don't really need him right now. So I think at the end of the day, he's just a hold for me.
There's some parallels of the beginning of the career for a Mr. Trey Lance, where you had the year 1 excitement. Obviously he got hurt or whatever in his first or second start. I can't remember what it was, and then which value was just kind of stagnant, maybe a little bit down. That following off season, if you had cashed your Trey Lance, turned your card in and just cashed out there, it would have felt really good. And again, this is Josh Allen. Josh Allen has destroyed everything for all of us, because we've seen what happens when an archetype player of Anthony Richardson's status and his abilities, if it gets fixed, you have a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. You have a fantasy difference-making superstar for your roster. But guys just don't turn it around that much. So you got to play the odds with the risk reward that
sure.
you
I think it's a great
handle.
way to put it. And real quick before we move on, shout out to Trey Lance. Second thing.
He's still on my roster, boys. He's still there.
Just killing the preseason.
Do you guys know what he turned into when they traded? Like, do you know who he turned into? Like
what it was a 4th or a 3rd,
it was
right?
Garendo.
Ooh. I will say before we move on, just on the situation of like kind of the ebbs and flows of the market, like Mike said, that's a great point. There's going to be a period of time next year. It feels a lot also like Justin Fields-ish, where it's like you can see the warning signs of like his longevity in the league is probably not there as a starter. But when he's on the field, fantasy is going to be very good. And you're going to have that like perceived mindset in the market in your leagues. So wait for those opportunities, and I think capitalize when you can.
All right, moving on.
Keep, trade, cut.
Been doing keep, trade, cut in the footballers world for a while. And I think in Dynasty, we're trying to assess the value of different players, not necessarily saying we're going to cut this guy. Okay. We already know you can't cut that guy, right? That's our motto.
No, you can't cut that guy.
You can't cut Trey Lance.
I got Trey Lance on my roster, people. You can't cut that guy.
I did search for news. I was like, man, has there been any Trey Lance news recently? And the articles they just say like, what were the Cowboys thinking trading for Trey Lance? Still a puzzling move.
You know, the Cowboys season
and then there's
is hanging in the balance. They got to go to their top quarterback, Trey Lance.
I bet.
So Trey Lance is in a contract year. So he hits the market next year. We're going to find some starting opportunities for our boy.
I wonder how motivated. I bet he's super motivated right now.
Oh, man. Unbelievable. You wouldn't even believe how motivated he is.
I mean, you just check the boxes. Like former top 5 pick. Like, nobody believes in me anymore. You know, Dallas Cowboy. It's like, nobody thinks we're good anymore. Trey Lance. That checks the box.
It's like going back to college. Trey Lance has appeared in what? Like 10 games or something in 5 years?
Richardson.
Yeah, you're not wrong. So we're going to talk about some players. I wanted to start off with quarterbacks and give you guys a list of 3 rookie quarterbacks and how you guys would assess them, keep, trade, cut. Bo Nix, or as we call him, Bo Nix, just one word.
Bo Nix.
Drake May and J.J. McCarthy. Okay, before the season, on average, May and McCarthy was like a coin flip based on who you liked more in drafts, in rookie drafts. And the Nix was a little bit later. Nix is by far the oldest. He's 24.7. May is 22. And McCarthy is only 21.8, and yet he hasn't done anything yet. We didn't get to see a full game from Drake May, so the numbers I'm using here is just his 2 full starts, but over 20 fantasy points per game. And Nix has been really good over the last 4 games. So how would you guys sort these out? Like if you were in a startup draft, how would you sort these out? Betz, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I feel like I've been on Drake May for basically since the offseason started. So I think he's my favorite of the group. Just, Bo Nix, like, not to take away from his production, because for fantasy, it's been really, really good over these last few weeks. I'm not sure how sticky his rushing production is going to be moving forward, like in his career. He did run a little bit in college, so it's not like this is out of nowhere, but he's quietly on pace for almost 700 yards this season, which I don't think anybody would have predicted to be the outcome for Bo Nix. Whereas like Drake May, when I watched him in college, and you've seen some flashes already, like he is a plus scrambler in my opinion. No, never going to be Lamar or, whoever, but be able to pick up yards consistently and throw the football deep down the field. That combination to me just gives me the outlook that's so much higher in my opinion for a guy like Drake May. And not that Bo Nix can't be a good starter or a good quarterback too in fantasy, for Superflex leagues for the next several years, but I just feel so much more confident about Drake May's upside than I do Bo Nix. And McCarthy, it's just a giant question mark. We saw a couple snaps in the preseason and that's it. Obviously we like the situation for him, but it's just a complete unknown. So I would personally rank it, I think, May, Nix, McCarthy, I think. But the Nix McCarthy one for me is a coin flip.
Who holds the most trade value right now?
Oh, that's an interesting
Not McCarthy.
Question.
It's not McCarthy.
No, but between, I think it's probably still May.
I think so.
I think so.
I think so too. There obviously has been some buzz recently of how Bo Nix has been playing, and then if you walk through the opponents, it's like, okay, Carolina, the Raiders was one of those games. They played the Saints the week before, but he's been running, and so I think at the end of the day, you look at these quarterbacks, and they all kind of possess some sneaky, under-the-radar rushing ability. Even Drake May, the last 3 weeks, he's had a 15-plus yard run, and he only played 30% of the snaps. So I think May is the one that I'd want to keep. And to toot my own horn, I did trade for him last week in a Superflex league.
What'd you give up?
Because I needed a third. I gave up a first and Tank Bigsby.
I would do that.
Oh, okay.
Okay. It's always nice to hear on my own podcast if I'm an idiot or not. Yeah, so I felt pretty good, but I think May would be the keep. I think Nix at least is holding enough value, maybe more value that you could trade, and then McCarthy would be the cut. I think the scariest thing is just McCarthy and how do you assess him, because you're just guessing, you're hoping next year. I'm assuming he's their guy next year, but who knows?
But that's the big assumption. I mean, if Sam Darnold takes this team on a playoff run, which, I mean, they're trending towards making the playoffs. I can see a way that this team falls apart and they end up not making it. But right now they're trending towards that. And not that teams don't make those types of, intestinal fortitude decision to switch quarterbacks. That's a really hard thing of if Sam Darnold plays extremely well and then it's like, oh no, we're gonna turn it over to the rookie here who has not taken a snap in the NFL, this team that made it to the playoffs last year. So it's the Sam Darnold playing as well as he is right now has to be taken into account when you're thinking about J.J. McCarthy's value.
Yeah. Would you rather have McCarthy or, let's say, a late first in Superflex? Because that's where you took him. You probably took him at 6, 7, 8.
Right.
That's tough.
I mean,
I think it's okay to say like that's pretty much where I would value him.
That's where you'd have to.
yeah,
I think.
I think the first. It's just because then it becomes the question of, can J.J. McCarthy be? Is he just a quarterback? Like, is he just a quarterback for fantasy? Like, is he going to put up Darnold-esque numbers? Because if he's doing that, then I'm not going to trade him for the late first. But if it's, lower production than that, and it's just streamable type of numbers, then I might hit the reset, try to find a different guy. I don't know. That's a really difficult one.
Do you guys feel like going into this season, if we thought these guys were each starting the same number of games before McCarthy got injured, I would have thought that McCarthy would have been the best fantasy asset for 2024.
I am
for sure
in agreement.
Kevin O'Connell's system is just, it's like perfect for quarterbacks. I mean, Sam Darnold is doing it, right? And it's, I mean,
yeah.
I don't want to put this lightly, but it's hard to fail when you're throwing to the best wide receiver in the game. TJ Hawkinson's pretty good. We still haven't seen him this year. Jordan Addison is a great wide receiver too. Like, that's a pretty sweet trio. So with Kevin O'Connell, so you would have to be very bad at playing quarterback to fail in the system, in my opinion.
There's some bad quarterbacks out there.
There are, but I think we need to start blaming coaches more.
Oh, for sure.
Wait, tell me more.
Well, like, just look at this year, okay? Sam Darnold is having a fantastic year. Geno Smith, the season isn't as great, but Geno Smith in the last 2 years has been one of the better quarterbacks in the league.
Blame the Jets.
Baker Mayfield.
That's what you're saying.
Baker Mayfield and the Panthers. Baker Mayfield is playing out of his mind, and where fantasy spin, but real life NFL, Baker's playing pretty freaking well for a guy who was cast off into the shadows. I mean, to have this amount of quarterbacks being like, oh, they're turning their career around. Like, oh, no, maybe they were just trapped in really bad situations with coaches who should not have had jobs. Mike thoughts, man. This is what I do.
You know what? If I just go through a list of NFL teams and I look at just some of those, like, okay, look at the Giants. It's like Joe Judge was a turd. So if you were on that team for 2 or 3 years, I am sorry, but part of your career was just ended. Like Darius Slayton.
Your career could have been totally destroyed.
Yeah, Darius Slayton is a fine NFL wide receiver. And I feel like that team has said over the last 5 years, we don't want you on our team. And every year he's like, I'll play for you guys. I'll play as hard as I can. I'm going to have some big games. Like, he had 100 on Monday night, and it's like they didn't care for years because they just had some terrible, terrible coaching.
I think it's a great point, especially because when you think about Dynasty, like, we always think about, okay, like, what is going to happen over the next 3 years? But a player's value in trades or startups or what have you, it all comes back to what they do in their rookie year, right? I mean, that's just the truth. Like, Cedric Tillman did nothing. Nobody wanted Cedric Tillman, right? Everyone was hyped about Sky Moore. He did nothing. Now he has no value, right? Like, so whatever you do in your first year or two.
Well, he's now done nothing for multiple years. But
don't worry about the fact that he scored a touchdown against my Eagles in the Super Bowl. The first couple years matter so much that there's a big debate in the Dynasty world of, like, you overvalue situation. Situation changes so much. Yet situation matters a lot for how you perform in year one, especially at quarterback. So I think that's a very good take just moving forward into, like, next year and beyond. That's how I feel. So I'm with you, Mike. I think situation for quarterbacks and trusting good offenses and teams and coaches is generally going to work out more than it's not. And the Joe Judge example is a great one there.
It feels like an off-season study is brewing, where we go through, we look at whole situation, but also factor in, like, periods where there are certain coaching staffs, and we just label them turd. It's like, oh, there was a turd. There was a true stain on this player for years.
There's a turd in that pool.
Somebody's got to clean it up. And
and here's the thing, guys. I want you to think about this. How big of a pool? Just one turd in a pool. How large does that pool have to be for you to even go in that water?
These are deep thoughts.
Just one poop in there, man. I don't know how big it has to be. It has
the ocean.
That whole it has to be like the ocean, but it's like one turd can ruin an entire beautiful pool.
This is gold.
You're not wrong. I really do have to think about, what I would do if I was in that situation. Mike, you're the only pool owner here currently. So,
well, yeah, it's mandatory when you live in the desert.
I don't clean my poop at all. I just let it go. I do what I would. All right, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. Don't forget, at the beginning of this podcast, I called you guys, did I use the word intelligent?
Fine, gentlemen.
esteemed, whatever it was. And I feel like the discussions today have been really, really good. They've been enlightening. But I did want to get some more keep, trade, cut here. So we'll move a little faster. This one is tough because I'm going to bring up some stud running backs. If you've had them on your team this year, you are loving life. So the first name I'll bring up is Devon Achane. He's 23 years old. In 3 Tua starts, he's been awesome. RB7, RB3, RB4. Jonathan Taylor, who, when he's been on the field, 19 points per game. Saquon Barkley, if you've had him, 21 points per game. He's averaging 109 rushing yards per game on the ground. So keep, trade, cut, Achane, Taylor, and Barkley.
This one's brutal. I think I have to start that conversation. We're not moving fast. Were you dumb? I'm over here on this show. We're not moving fast. Is Saquon Barkley a true outlier player? And I mean that like seriously, not like, oh, of course he is. No,
like Derrick Henry.
Like, do you think like exactly
multiple years at this age is what you're saying?
Barkley is going to be 28 very soon, which the age cliff for most running backs, just the average, is he's already a little bit past it. It's once guys are hitting up 27, yeah, a little bit of that step goes away, and just enough that the career is probably close to over. But Barkley has been looking fantastic, and it's so I mean, like, I don't want to immediately look at these three guys and go, Devon Achane's 23. That's an easy answer. Like, you would actually talk through it because the answer might be the oldest running back of this list, which feels, and if you're talking Dynasty football, that feels disgusting to even entertain that thought. But I think that's where the process has to start.
It's a good question, or a good point, rather, I should say, on like the age thing. Because for me, like I pretty much play Dynasty in a 2-year window. So if a player is, 29, 30, 31, then it's like, okay, yeah, that's a completely different conversation. I'm not expecting Devon Achane to be on my team for the next 6 years. So I think that's a great way to put it. And, like, when I look at these names, I think Barkley has the best chance to be a guy that finishes in the top 10 again next year. And maybe the year after that. He signed a huge deal with Philly. They got one of the best offensive lines in football. You've got A.J. Brown. You've got Devonta Smith. Like, it's going to open up for you to run the football and be very effective. So I think I lean Barkley as like the highest value here. Taylor, to me, just, I don't know what it is about Jonathan Taylor. Like, maybe it's the recurring ankle issues. Maybe it's just the Anthony Richardson stuff of just like, fair. It feels like it's been forever since we had that legendary season a couple years ago that he's been good, when he's been on the field, but like he doesn't feel like a difference maker.
He's having one. His numbers are so good, man.
He's been like, we kind of forget because how many games was he out? 3?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, he's been awesome on the ground. And so, like, you guys fell into my trap because the reason
he's on pace for over 1,500 rushing yards
with 3 games missed
on a 17-game pace. No, I'm just saying, like, you average out his 5 games. 17-game pace would be 15 because he's running for over 90 yards.
And with Flacco, he might get some more usage in the pass game.
And almost 18 receiving yards, and that's right now. Like, Jonathan Taylor is one of the, like, yeah, Michael Pittman, huge winner. Josh Downs, huge winner. Jonathan Taylor, to me, is like low-key the biggest one because this dude could be a top 3 fantasy running back rest of season.
So before the season, I think Taylor would have been the easy one that you would have taken ahead of Barkley, and then I'm assuming we would have taken him ahead of Achane, but Achane would have been a young, sexy name we could have brought up. I brought these names because Dynasty football usually is, okay, the old guy is the one you're going to cut because, you don't want to be caught left holding the bag. And yet I think this is one of those situations where rest of season of these 3, I want Barkley. And then you can then have the conversation who's going to be better next year. And I think I'd still take Barkley. And so that's, if you're going in a 2-year window, cool. Like, go in that direction. It's totally fine. Don't, just because someone else told you they're older and they're bad. Like, I think Barkley is the one that I would keep here. I think Taylor holds a ton of value too, though, so it's not like he's far behind. Achane, though, is a different player with Tua, especially when it comes to the passing game. So if you're in full PPR, like, I don't blame anyone for thinking that Achane has the highest ceiling of just getting you insane. I mean, 7, 7, and 8 targets in the 2 games. That's a wide receiver that you're getting to play, and you know that on the ground he's been awesome as well. So I think for me,
it's fragile.
Oh, for sure.
So, where Jonathan Taylor is like, he was putting up these great numbers. I mean, we were concerned about how will he do with Richardson as the full-time quarterback. Can he really hit the elite ceiling? And he's been doing fantastic. So to the point of like, no, he's a great fantasy running back, and now things are even better for him. Like the Richardson wasn't a tremendous downgrade. So just trying to think of, okay, well, what if chess pieces move for the Indianapolis Colts? Is Jonathan Taylor still this good? I pretty close, I think. Same thing. Ask the questions for Barkley. Like Mr. Eagles fan, what if the Eagles implode? And like don't make the playoffs or something.
Like they fail down the stretch like last year. When they were terrible.
Right. If that were to happen, let's say that happens. What's the coaching staff?
It's not Sirianni.
For the Philadelphia Eagles the following year. Like that's what I mean. Like there's pieces that can move for all of these teams, and yet if Sirianni's out, and I don't care who's in, Saquon Barkley's the dude. You know what I mean? So the fragility of Devon Achane is not even just talking him, which is funny because that's how the conversation talks about Achane a lot because he's so small. Oh, but he is ceiling. If everything goes right, the ceiling for Achane is higher than those other 2 guys. I think just because of the way that we score fantasy football.
All right, I'll put it this way at the very end. Who goes highest in a startup draft in 2025?
I think
I was going to say Taylor, but I don't know. I think Taylor.
I think it's Taylor, but I think Achane's close. At the end of the day, like you have an RB1, if you have any of these guys, you should be very, very happy, but Achane feels very fragile. As somebody who has him Dynasty, it's awesome, and it is scary because you feel like it could just be gone in a week. So make sure you insure him with Jalen Wright if you can. That's what you should be doing right now.
Yeah.
All right, some second-year wide receivers that before this season, this would have been the easiest discussion we've ever had. Now this player might end up being the cut of this list. So second-year wide receivers, the aforementioned Cedric Tillman, Josh Downs, and Tank Dell. And I bring these guys up because Dell went 69th overall in the draft, Tillman went 74th, and Downs went 79th in 2023. So they were all right there together as late day 2 picks. Tillman would have just been an afterthought in this discussion because he was so bad as a rookie, and yet he's gaining a little bit of steam right now. I don't want to project too far, but Tank Dell, Josh Downs, Cedric Tillman, give me your keep trade cut.
I'll go first. Oh,
okay.
You looked at me like Mike, like you were like,
please
tell the people.
All right, Betz, tell the people.
I can't quit Tank Dell, man. I can't quit him.
Okay.
Tank Dell is the correct keep. Like we're still coming off of the injury, so
and Diggs out for the year.
I personally am.
The people need this, guys. The dynasty managers need something to hold on to.
I personally am still going to forgive Tank Dell for a while he's recovering from this injury. Just to have seen what other guys do for coming back from that type of an injury. That it takes some time, and he's still linked to C.J. Stroud. Josh Downs might be the better wide receiver, and he's younger, but the rest of season, give me Josh Downs. I mean, if we're gonna actually get Joe Flacco rest of season, but I don't think that answer was given to us at all, right? Everything was basically, well, Richardson's gonna be benched for now. I don't think it wasn't a firm.
Correct.
We're gonna go with Joe Flacco for the rest of the season. So I think Downs might be the better quarterback, but he has all of the stuff of who is actually the quarterback, how stable is the franchise and things moving forward. So I'm gonna keep Tank Dell. I'm gonna trade Downs, and Cedric Tillman it's still too early talk about him like we talk about.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Tank Dell to me, like, it's been a rough start, obviously, but most people acknowledge, like, there's a world where Diggs comes in and has a role. Like, everybody wanted to cast him off because of what happened in Buffalo, but what if he comes in and he commands targets? And what do you know? He comes in and he commands targets. Like, he was great in his role for this team. It wasn't like incredible for fantasy, but it was pretty good. That's removed, right? You get a couple games without Nico. Nico will be back soon, but you have a short window here for Tank Dell to step up and be the dude and show us what he showed us last year. And I still think that's in his range of outcomes and in his game. So I'm not quitting Tank Dell. I will say, if there is a window to trade Tillman, especially if you're like, you know what, I don't know who's the starter next year. It's probably not Winston. What if they bring back Watson and try it again? Like, they if you will can capitalize on this short little window with Tillman, I think that's a savvy move in Dynasty, especially if you're not, if you're competing or you're not relying on Tillman, I would say, then I think it's a savvy move.
Would you rather have Tillman or a mid-second?
Probably the second.
It's close. And I don't blame anyone for holding in there with Tillman, but let's say you weren't counting on him to be anything more than your wide receiver 6, 7, I don't know.
Not even that.
And so if he is that on your team, then changing that into a 2 is totally fine. It could be, you could get Cedric Tillman with that second round pick. That's basically, let's be honest.
And worth noting, weeks 9 through 17, strength of schedule when adjusting for strength of opponent. The Cleveland Browns have the worst quarterback schedule remaining, and the worst wide receiver schedule remaining. So, if I like Tillman, I like the chance that it's going to work, but you have a really strong chance that his value is about to just completely go back to what it was.
It's funny, Josh Downs is a player that I hear Jason bring up a lot, and Jason was the most anti-Josh Downs person I have ever met. Like,
I hated him.
And my comp was always Jamison Crowder. Like, oh, that's all he's ever going to be. He looks way more dynamic than that. Like, Josh Downs, Jason's been all over him recently, but like, he looks like he just knows what to do on the football field. Like, he should have had another touchdown this past week. So,
sure.
I think mine is keep Tank Dell. I think Josh Downs has a ton of trade value right now, and then cut Cedric Tillman. Thought we were getting a little more spicy, but I'm glad we're at least holding the line. I'm sure there's some Tank Dell managers that just hate us right now. They're like, you guys keep holding on. All right, let's do one more. And I'm calling this tight end tease, because the names I'm going to give us are George Kittle, who's been freaking awesome. Just unbelievable.
Yeah, he has.
Super consistent. Everything that George Kittle usually isn't in fantasy. But he's 31 years old. Kyle Pitts, who's 24 years old. He's the tight end 5 on the season, and he's been really good over the last month. And then Dalton Kincaid, 25 years old. He has only one finish inside the top 12. And I bring these names up because before the season, if I would have asked you, who would you want in Dynasty? I'm pretty sure all of us would have said Dalton Kincaid is the dude.
Yes.
And then I think we probably would have said Kittle, because we'd be like, I don't know what to do with Pitts.
For sure.
So let's sort these guys out right now. 8 weeks into the season, Kittle, Pitts, Kincaid.
Kyle, why don't you go first this time?
Tell the people, Betz.
I like this.
So just for context of how hot George Kittle is running right now, in half-point scoring, he's averaging 15.2 points per game. In the breakout sophomore year, where it was like, holy crap, who's this George Kittle guy, where he was almost 1,400 yards and 5 touchdowns, he was averaging 13.4. So almost 2 points better. We're only halfway through the season. So I expect the numbers probably go down a little bit, but that is unbelievable heater that Kittle is on right now. He's 31. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. This one's really
who has the most trade value?
You don't want the most trade value?
I think
it's Kittle right now.
It's either Kittle or Pitts.
It's not Kincaid to me.
Yeah. No, it's not. I think he has the lowest trade value of the three, because he's just, he is not getting it done. He's not even close to getting it done. And now the team added Amari Cooper. Like, you can't be. I don't want to move on from Dalton Kincaid at tight end in year 2 and just be like, it's done, it's over. We literally almost did that with Trey McBride. We were at the point halfway through his second year going, guys, what do we do dynasty-wise with Trey McBride? Like, do we need a Viking funeral here? Because it's like it doesn't seem to be happening. And then literally like lightning, it's just 1 week, oh, here's the opportunity for Trey McBride, and he's dominating. So, like, that could happen for Dalton Kincaid. That is possible. I don't want to throw it out, but I don't want to throw out, is it actually happening for Kyle Pitts, or is he just thriving under some good game scripts and some good opportunities here with
I think
Cousins?
With Pitts, it's so tough because, ironically, on this show, in the weekly review, I talked about Kyle Pitts when it was going terribly, and like it didn't look good watching him play. And then all of a sudden on Thursday night, Kirk Cousins swag surfs for 500 yards, and everything's fine, right?
Glorious.
And everything's fine.
It was the best.
And he has had an insane stretch of really good matchups for tight ends. Not that he hasn't capitalized, like, credit to him, he has. I just still feel like this version of the Falcons offense, while it has been great, there's regression coming, is what I feel like, with how Kirk has played and how
you watch your tone
with how well.
But you're right. I
with
agree
how well
with
he's
you,
played,
actually.
and just it feels like they're running like close to the sun. At the same time, George Kittle has had an unbelievable run out. When you think about not just his efficiency as a player, but no McCaffrey for the entire season thus far. Brandon Ayuk, slow start, then tears his ACL. Deebo Samuel, pneumonia, then rib injury. Like, it's all kind of just Juwan Jennings injured. It's all kind of happening for Kittle. And what's interesting is you used to be so accustomed to, okay, I know Kittle's going to give me 4 or 5 like week winning weeks, and then he's going to disappear for 3 weeks in a row. That's just what he does. But the interesting thing about him is he's getting targets that are a little bit more high percentage this year, especially around the line of scrimmage. And I wonder, with McCaffrey back, does that change at all? So I'm not saying you should move on from Kittle, especially if you're a contender. He's been great. But I just feel like there is regression coming for 2 of these 3 guys in Kittle and Pitts. And Kincaid, I mean, I hope he goes the other direction as far as regression it goes. But I think Kittle and Pitts will come back down to earth at some point very soon.
The Falcons' remaining schedule for tight end, it's ranked as like the 28th worst, but it's really because they're all the majority of them are moderately negative. Like, there's nothing catastrophic until you get into the fantasy playoffs, which the semis are New York Giants -3 points above expectation. The Manders in championship week on the road -2 against expectation. But they're like, there's no juicy matchup here coming up for the rest of the season for Pitts, unless you play week 18 like a psychopath.
The one thing that I will add about Atlanta is they've been pretty fortunate for their offensive skill position players to be healthy. Like, other than the offensive line, like, you haven't had any major injuries. And usually with teams, the targets shift where, somebody gets hurt. And so then, David Njoku all of a sudden gets peppered with targets, or they trade somebody and the situation changes. You haven't had that yet with Atlanta. So just bake that in, that I think over the rest of the season, I think somebody will get hurt. It's just how it works. But I think at the end of the day, looking at this, if you are a contender and you don't have a tight end, okay, let's just say you've been like, I really want to go all in. Are you saying I would go all in with George Kittle of these 3 in Dynasty?
I think you have to if you're trying to win.
I would.
And that will cost you a first and something else? That's kind of where I'm putting the bar at.
It probably
Most
would.
likely.
Which, I mean, that's an expensive and really risky going all in.
Yeah. For an older tight end, obviously they age well in the life cycle. He's still fine in terms of like having some years left. But
would you rather pay that price, pay the Kittle price right now, or maybe you can get like Travis Kelce a little bit cheaper?
You can definitely get Kelce a lot cheaper, I think.
He's still a first.
I don't know, man. You think?
I've tried.
Okay.
I've tried. Man.
I haven't tried yet, so maybe that's why. I mean, if they're both costing a first, it depends on what the plus is. If the plus isn't that much, I'd take Kittle. You get a few more years of, I mean, what is Kelsey's 35, right? So you get 4 years there. Yeah, if that's the price for Kittle and Kelsey and it's that close, I'm going to get Kittle.
I think right now, long-term dynasty, I would go Pitts. I would trade Kittle because I think you're going to get more in return than what he's going to offer you the next 2 years. And then I think Kincaid would be the cut. I worry.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's crazy how much that's changed from 8 weeks ago, where Kincaid's somebody in redraft, you're like, oh, he's going to be a PPR machine. And going back through when I watched their targets earlier, they're just not valuable targets. That's like what sucks is like if you just get a player that just turns around and, you know, gets some first downs, but like is not getting in. He doesn't get as many end zone targets for a tight end. Dawson Knox still gets those right now, and those are super frustrating. So I think Pitts. Am I being homerism there that he would be the keep?
Yes.
No, I don't mind it. I don't mind trying to be like back in on Pitts, but I think Kittle's more of a sure thing right now.
Tight end is fun, man. It's still one of my favorite parts of Dynasty because it changes. Guys emerge. We talk about Will Disley all of a sudden. Adam Troutman's alive. There's so many.
He's not. That's just, it was a fun week. But also Zach Ertz currently outscoring Dalton Kincaid. Just so
delete that.
So everyone
Producers,
wants to
delete that.
Feel that pain.
Yeah, don't let the government know about that. Okay, so Zach Ertz is still alive, and in week 8, in week 9, we're still talking about him. That's going to do it for this edition of Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. Make sure that you go to fantasyfootballers.com and go to ballersdiscord.com. Be a part of our Dynasty roster review. We'll talk to you again next week.
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. If you want to take your dynasty skills to the next level, check out thefantasyfootballers.com.